Hey everyone, today we're doing something a little bit different. Mini retro video game consoles are in fad, and a lot of them have new modern user interfaces made for modern televisions, and I thought it would be nice to make a little bit of a retro console television UI on our own, and we're going to do so using the latest version of Sketch. So I'm just going to open up Sketch and get started. Now we're making something for TV, so we want to start with a TV artboard. I'm going to hit A on my keyboard, and you can see I've made some custom artboards for myself. This one is 1920 by 1080, which is a 1080p resolution television. Now we're going to use the internet a little bit because we want to get reference material together. And if you're a Patreon subscriber, you have access to these files, and I will include the links below in the video so that you know where to get this stuff. But the first thing I have set up is I'm going to make my retro console based after the Super Nintendo. That was my system growing up and one of my favorite consoles that I've ever had. So here I have a bunch of Super Nintendo box art, and let me pull up my reference here. It looks like, thank you to GitHub user Ramia Braham, they put together this awesome collector's set of a bunch of old retro console images. And so we have a bunch of images to choose from. You can put your favorite games in there. All right, I'm going to grab one of my pieces of box art here, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle over it to get a general size of what these are. And this isn't pixel perfect. This isn't even going off of the box dimensions. This is just a way for us to have a generic aspect ratio reference, and it looks like it's 475 by 347. We're going to end up wanting a lot of these, so let's just make some basic properties. I'm going to fill it. I'm going to fill it with an image. Oh, it looks super great right now, right? And then I'm going to type a game title under here. Game title. And now, if you're dealing with television screens, you can generally go as low as 28 pixels without people having too much of a problem. However, I find I like to get those numbers up to 32 or even 36 pixels. And let's say we want about 4 of these across our screen. So we'll just very quickly put 4 on screen and see what this is going to take to fit. So they're all total probably just about as wide as our TV. I'm going to hit tidy and put just 12 pixels between them. Yeah, we're a little bit beyond the TV. So why don't we lock their aspect ratio and take them down to, say, 420, maybe even a little bit further, 375. Now, if you end up with an odd number here, don't be afraid to just round it out, and 273.95 will go to 274. So what was looking pretty large at first is maybe now looking a little bit less so. I'm going to space this a little bit apart, group these together, and let's see what it looks like to get 4 across now. Tidy them up, align them, and that's good. You want somewhere around 5% of the screen to have some level of padding. On 79 we do 64. That looks good to me. So let's say we could comfortably fit about 8 games on the screen at a time. That's enough for me to browse and look through. Now let's round out some additional areas of user experience that you would probably want on something like this. So let's say that we hold a lot of games on this thing. So I'm going to make little circles, and I'll make them 18 point. They're pretty small. And we'll make a bunch of them. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We'll say we have 9 pages of 8. That's quite a bit of games on this thing. And I'm going to space them 32 apart. You can use the tidy command to space, but I also have a plugin called Automate that does wonders for spacing. So I'm just using that in combination with some keyboard shortcuts I have to do my spacing. All right, we've got some pages, and we ideally probably want some button prompts as well. So why don't we come down here and say we'll have a button for maybe searching, so I can find the game I want very quickly, and we'll have a sort option as well. And maybe we want to skip pages, so we can have a next and a back or previous. Probably a little bit better wording there. Back can sometimes signal to people that they are going to exit something or go back a level, and in this case we just kind of want to move left and right. All right, with this being set up, it's time to start applying some styles. So I'm just going to go ahead and option drag this out and make a exact copy. And I'm going to label this first one wireframe. What I'm doing here is I'm reserving that top bar for maybe that's going to contain information, maybe branding, some style. And why don't we do default theme? We're going to kind of theme this. So the way that I would go about doing this is pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and open up my Super Nintendo references again, take one of these and actually put a piece of cover art in here. And the winner this time is Battletoads and Double Dragon. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, open up its image, and then just drag this right in here. Okay, so we have this. It's got kind of a gray border. Let's make it a little bit more naturalistic. And the way I'm going to do that is ungroup this. And why don't we do maybe 8 pixels around those corners a little bit. And rounding corners is really up to the person. I suggest that you don't really crop off a piece of box art for somebody, but some people like things a little bit rounder. Some people like them a little bit more severe. You can go as low as 0, obviously. Maybe 3 or 4 is your taste, but I like a pretty generous rounding. So I'm going to go 8. That looks good to me, and I'm going to use smooth corners and give it that apple-like smoothness. Now I'm going to turn off the border. And I'm looking for a font that's a little bit more this kind of Super Nintendo, very tall and oblique, which kind of means slanted. And I think if I get something like DIN, maybe even DIN condensed, that is a lot more. DIN next. Now, you might not have DIN. That's kind of a bit of a premium font there. I'm going to change to bold italics, and maybe I even force capitalization on it. If our title goes a little bit off, this is hard to see, but you can grab it here. And as I pull, I can align it with my box art. And I'm going to make sure it's a reasonable amount of space away. So 10, 11, 12. That looks pretty cool to me. I'm going to go with something like that. I don't know how I feel about the all caps. And maybe and would be an ampersand in this, but it's a little bit of a weird line break. Maybe we'll start there. Now I'm going to take these two things, and I'm going to go ahead and create a symbol from them, and I'll call them game tile. Now that I have the game tile created as a symbol, I'll select the rest of my groups, right-click, and replace them in the document with game tile. And just like that, they're all there. Now notice they're not quite the size of the other one. Well, that's because this became larger than those when I went down to a second line. So now you can just select the rest of these tiles, right-click, and down at the bottom, set them to the original size, which is the same size as ours here. And maybe that means now we have to scoot it up and hide this box art in the meantime. Okay, I've got a lot of copies of Battletoads and Double Dragon on this. Now I'm going to drag in a reference shot for us of a Super Nintendo. So I just want a sense of the Super Nintendo's kind of look, feel, style, the whole thing. So I've got a picture here of a Super Nintendo. And that's okay. I think I also have one downloaded. And this is actually specifically of the Super Nintendo Mini. But that is pretty modern of a photograph, so it's pretty good to sample colors from. It might not be exact like the original, but it's a good hint. Now let's start applying some of this like gray and purple Super Nintendo style. I know there's going to be people from Europe and Japan who played the Super Famicom that are used to that totally bright color palette, but the Super Nintendo is where my heart is as a gamer, so I would like to sort of recreate it on its face value. So I'm going to go ahead here and do some shadowing, and I'm going to do that with a linear gradient, and I'm just going to directly sample these two colors. We'll go with the rightmost light edge of that Super Nintendo, and then for my right color, I'll sample, and I'll come down here, and I'll get an edge that's much closer to shadow. So we're almost getting, I'm going to neutralize it just a little bit. So now we're sort of getting that Super Nintendo shadow gradient kind of look about it. And that looks about good to me, and I'm even going to save that gradient so I can refer back to it later. Now, the Super Nintendo had these kind of lines in it that were creating a lot of contrast and a lot of shadow, so we're going to create some of those too. I'm going to hit L on my keyboard, and maybe I'll draw some lines just going up and down the console. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to take my border, make it black, but then make it a transparency so the color sort of shines through. And I'm going to make its mode multiply so it picks up as much color as it can. Then separately, make that 2. Separately, I'm going to give it a shadow that's offset on the X by 2. I'm going to make that white. Turn the blur all the way down, which gives the illusion of a second line. And then this, I'm going to crank to maybe 80%. So technically, what this has done is created 2 lines. And from far away, it almost makes your eyes vibrate, but it creates that illusion of depth and contrast in the shadow. Now we have a line and a secondary with that contrast. I'm going to take that and give it a style. Line style is pretty good. Why don't I call it shadow line? I'll hit Command D, duplicate it, and bring that over here. You can see Sketch is trying to find it for me. I'm going to bring it all the way to the left and just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Tap it in 6. And then over here, same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now I've got nice even margins. And why don't we separate out our toolbar down here too? We'll just duplicate this line, and I'll take one edge and I'll drag it down here to match this bottom corner. Zoom in and see what that looks like. It's off the canvas right now, so I'll hold down Shift and start tapping my up arrow. So there we go. Take all my commands, center them, and center them in that space. Okay, not so bad. We're off to a good start. I'm going to take these 2 rows and I'm going to inch them a little closer to each other. Maybe 12 more. And then let's space them from the bottom. So 48 from this bottom line. Now let's create some button prompts. And the way we're going to do that is recreate this button look here on the Super Nintendo. I'm going to hit O on my keyboard and start dragging out a circle. My circle's 48 by 48. You're not trying to match size here. I'm just going to get fill. And you want to pick, when you have something that has a lot of shadow on it, you want to kind of just pick a central color and have it average that. In fact, I'm going to save this color for later reference. It looks a little dark to me, but that's just because it's on this light. It's kind of an optical illusion. It looks close when we are close. Now we'll take a second, and why don't we sample our Super Nintendo Deep Purple here. Great, and while you're here, if you really want, now's the time to grab some nice generic tones that you may want to use in other places in the design. Now these buttons aren't bad, but they're not super buttony. I'm going to go ahead and just block off some of this so we can see a little bit better what's going on. In fact, hey, why don't I steal this color? Now we're going to give it some shadow and highlight to bring out and make it feel a little bit more 3D for the person looking at it. We're going to add some shadows, and those are going to be offset on the X and the Y. We'll blur those up, and then we'll take them way down so they're much more subtle. 20, 25 at most. Now we're going to take that border, we're going to bring it outside, we're going to make it all the way black, and then we'll turn down its opacity. Maybe up, rather. I kind of like that contrast to 70. Okay, now we're going to add a couple layer of inner shadow, and that's going to bring in this highlight. So I'm going to take our Y and our X. I'm going to make this white, and I'm going to make the white screen. And the more you pull this over, you can see the stronger that's going to be. If you want your blur a little bit less, you can dial up the opacity here. Maybe we'll do a couple of these. So that's one. Then we'll take this. We'll do some negative values here. We'll go ahead and make this something like overlay. Make this really dark, but then you can turn up the blur. Turn this down a little bit. Now we're building those dimensions of the button. Now there's one last shadow, if I'm really paying attention here. It's another highlight, but the highlight is catching the sort of opposite lip. And this one we're going to do maybe overlay as our blending mode. That looks right to me. And we're just going to dial it down. Make this a lot more subtle. It's just to pull it from the edge. Maybe we even blur it a little bit less. Maybe not at all. That looks okay. I'm just going to check what overlay looks like for our top highlight. That seems better to me, having this sort of colored brightness, but it doesn't quite look like what I'm seeing here in the reference photo. So we'll go back to screen and treat it a little bit more equal. Let's dial down the opacity a little bit. So the shadow looks a little strong here. I'm just going to dial it back a little bit more, flatten it out. And we have some really nice styles. So we've built up some pretty complicated styles on these. So let's save them. I'm sure we're going to want to reference these later. So under appearance, I'm going to create a new style. And I'll call this light button. And here, I'm going to create one called dark button. Why don't we say we'll do things with L and R too? So I'm going to go ahead and take this. I'm going to change the fill. The fill can be maybe one of our Super Nintendo existing gradients. And I'm going to create a new layer style and call this gray button. Now, let's go put our styles to work here. I'm going to copy these two and then just delete all three of these. And up here, we're going to give button prompts for these two. So I'm going to paste. Why don't we say search is going to happen and sort is going to happen. We'll look at our button configuration too. Maybe search is up here. You know, a button somebody's not going to press a lot. And sorting can be, why don't we do B? A is usually a confirmation button on Super Nintendo. So, sort will be B, that's dark. Search is X or Y. I'll go ahead, and it looks like I didn't make a style for these, so why don't I go ahead and create a new text style and say game title. Go back. Let's see what happens when I put these in the game title style. Yeah, it's not bad. But since I don't want it to stand out quite as much, I'll just make it, how about regular? I'll duplicate these. And we have our X and our B. Now the letters aren't actually inside the buttons on Super Nintendo, but you get the idea. And we will make these italic because they sort of have to be. Let's take these down a little bit to 30. Now 30, you're just on the lower limit of what somebody is going to be able to see. Left align those. And let's make sure they're evenly sorted. I'll do 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, let's do 12 instead. Boom, 11, 12. Now I'm going to lock my rectangle layer. Drag and group these and these. I'm going to take this and create a new style called prompt. We'll change these to be our prompt title. And why don't we go ahead and steal this, bring it over here. How tall are these buttons? 48? Okay. I'm going to make some wider ones. 48. And why don't we say we make them 120 wide? What we're going to have here is our L and R buttons. So L is left, R is right. And remember that other button style we made, our gray button? That's what we can use these for. On the gray button, we probably need to do a dark gray. It's not quite dark enough. Yeah, and we'll add that dark gray to our arsenal as well. And then they're much more rounded. So we'll round these out until they feel much smoother. You can even add this detail where you do something like 8 at the bottom. And you can just make one of these, dial it in, and copy it. You don't have to go about it this way. And at the top, I want to do something dramatic like 24. Really tell someone the story of where those buttons are located. Then you can highlight it all, center it. We'll do 10, 11, 12, 10, 11, 12, group, group. Maybe we'll make them 24 apart. And we will right align them with the games. Okay. We've got a next, a previous, a search, a sort. We're going to center align them all again and make sure that they're centered in their space. And now we have this sort of pagination control. What are we going to do with this? Well, we want to tell the user that there are empty pages or pages they're not viewing and pages they are viewing. So why don't we change them all to shadow line? And then why don't we say, pick one that you want to be the active page, any one you want. We'll increase its size a little bit and maybe make it lit up. Something like that. And if you want, the Super Nintendo actually had a power button that was red. So this could actually be kind of fun. Why don't we try and make it a power button? Pretty red. That's not bad. I'll set the stroke inside. We'll make that red. And then we'll do an outer shadow. And we're going to do one that's 4. The offset should be 0. And we're going to make it a very light red. And you can see there you're starting to get the effect. I'm going to duplicate it. This one's going to be something like 12. And this is going to be maybe more of an orangey full red. So this has a bit more fall off to it. And 24. And crank up the opacity. I'm going to bring it more into the red, all the way red. I'm just going to brighten up the center with this radial gradient. Bring that in. Size it. I just set it to screen. We'll do white at 0%. What screen does is it's going to really brighten up our center. Why don't we change it from screen to overlay? Is that more convincing or less convincing? It's always hard to tell. We'll say something like that for now. So now we have a little bit of a power light here. And then if we want, we can take the rest of these, maybe just fill them with a partially opaque color, make them look a little bit more inset. So now we have got all the interface elements kind of played out. Why don't we drop in some logo here? I've got a sketch file where I have sort of all the console logos splayed out for me. I have got these from all different sources of the internet. You can Google Super Nintendo logo vector sort of thing to get access to this, but I have one, and of course If you are a patron, you will be able to just download this file. So free of charge, you don't have to worry about it. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this so I can scale it down and see what it looks like. 50% isn't bad. 40% is even better. That's what I think. So I'm just going to make sure it's centered here and there. And it looks like, as much as I enjoy having this Super Nintendo red, and I'm going to add it just for posterity, it might make more sense for it to be in our dark. And that's looking pretty good. Maybe we want to go ahead and add our Nintendo overlay. I'm going to paste that in. Get rid of this. I'm going to take this Nintendo logo. I'm going to try and make it, say, this gray, and add an inner shadow. And look at that, with the inner shadow, you get that nice inset look. Scale it way down, maybe 25. Put that over here in the corner. And we'll take this and set it to multiply so it darkens. The last thing we can do is just add some hinting to the user that there are more games to the left and right. If you just keep, oops, don't drag too far. Use my keyboard to nudge it over the rest of the way. There are more games to be seen here. And now let's go ahead and look at that cover art and find some of our favorite Super Nintendo games to drop in here. At this point, if you're done with your reference images, feel free to get rid of them. And what are some of the games? There's a lot of good super games on Super Nintendo. Earthworm Jim. So I'm selecting my symbol here. First I'll select my symbol, and over here where it says choose image is where we're going to drag things. So Earthworm Jim. We're going to add him. All right, we're going to speed up the tape because it's not that fun watching me browse for files and type in labels kind of poorly with some spelling mistakes, but we'll drop in games like Harvest Moon and Fatal Fury and Home Improvement for laughs, Zelda, Mystical Ninja, and of course Mario Paint, which is the whole reason that I think I'm in this crazy design field to begin with. I'm going to dial in just a couple additional details here. And we're going to create a selected state. And why don't we make the game we're selecting Mario Paint? In fact, I'm going to select all of these and use my grabber handle to move Mario Paint here and flashback down here. Ooh. Flashback, you go there. Harvest Moon. You come up here. Now we're going to have an additional detail added to all of our games. We're going to duplicate the image, bring it down by 12. We're just going to blur it. Nice 10 pixel blur. We'll send it to the back. And then maybe take it down to 80%. So now we're getting some nice additional blur, but the blur is pulling color on there. So you get a really nice look. And in fact, you could do plus darker or plus lighter. Maybe that means you want to scooch the title down just a little bit and fit this. So that's really cool. It looks a little extreme to me. So why don't we just take it back to maybe 50%. Yeah, that's really neat. Now for our titles, I'm going to move them down a little bit further. And I'm going to add some effects. First, I'm going to add a background color here, just so I can see what this effect looks like. I'm going to add a shadow, and that shadow be really slight. We're going to add a second shadow. That's right. And this one's going to be going up, and it's not going to be very blurry at all. It's going to be white. So that's just going to be a little bit extra to look at that, kind of lift this off. Instead of going bold italic, why don't we do medium italic? Just lighten it up a little bit. Squish our characters together. A little kerning. And I'll make sure that the background is not included in exports. So now we have these titles that are popping. Now we've got these shadows that are pulling them off. And now why don't we add in a selected state? So I'm going to just draw a rectangle. It's about the size here. And I'm going to extend it 24 pixels in every direction. So I'm going to add 48 to my top and 48 to my bottom. And then just center this thing in here. Our edges for the game were 8, so I'm going to go 16. I'm just doubling it to kind of lift it up. I'm going to make this white. I'll take these two, lift them to the top, turn off my border, and let's give it a really big, strong shadow. 6, 24 for a blur. Maybe even more, 24. And we can lift it up, or alternatively, I'll right-click and detach from symbol, and I'll lift up just the box art. So now the game becomes lifted, and we have a little bit more of a raised effect here. I'll take this gray and I'll cool it down a little bit. Maybe even warm it up. And since it's detached, I'll go ahead and say something like September 1992. I'm not sure if that's when it came out, but you get the idea. We'll do one player. And this we're going to take down to our minimum, 28. Just make it regular. And we're going to lighten it up a little bit so it looks like a secondary piece of information. Bring it a little bit closer. So now when you hover on a game or you're going to select a game, you get a little bit more information about it. I can bring up the shadow a little bit too. Just really want that feeling of I have it selected. I'm going to play it. I want to play it. In fact, why don't we go ahead and add a prompt so the person knows what button we'll let them play. Line it here. Press A. And it looks like we're not going to have enough space if we do that with everything. So we're going to just say Sept 1992. It's good to consider your dates and stuff. You're going to need to treat them differently if you're making this for different regions as well. Dates are typically written different if you're in different parts of the world. So, a lot of time spent on style, very little time spent on the setup, a grid, right? Not that interesting of a concept, but you can see dialing in different details can really give you an effect that is worth noticing and worth checking out and evokes that feeling of I'm going to go play this game right now and I'm excited for it. Now, if you're interested in being a patron, I'm going to be building out a midnight version of this theme, so you can get it in a dark as well, and that'll just be in the download for this tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you saw some techniques here that give you some interesting ideas and inspiration as to what you could do on your own. Have a great day and keep designing.